Lovely. Oh.
Emily Kilner. Well, how lovely to get you on the show. I obviously we hang out at multiple events, whether it's pro paddle or overseas or in the UK. In your own words, who is Emily Kilner?
Well, thank you for having me. I feel like this is long overdue, Minter. Um, who is Emily Kilner? What an existential question.
Indeed.
Um, I would describe myself as a sports commentator, presenter, and host, which is probably at the minute 80% paddle, a little bit of football, a little bit of hockey, and a little bit of tennis in season. Um, and I absolutely love my job and what I do. It's a bit of a dream to be getting paid to talk about sport, and I don't take that for granted. It's awesome.
Well, you can hear it inevitably. You have a beautiful. They always say you have a voice for radio, which usually means you're distinctly not video, but you are good in both accounts. And on top of having a lovely voice, you have a voice that's English and Spanish, and your Spanish is impeccable, as we say in French. How on earth did you get to speak such good English with I mean, Spanish with such a wonderful English?
Um, I get asked this question a lot, but I studied Spanish at school, as a lot of people do. I went to Durham University, and I'd always known that I wanted to be fluent in another language. I loved going to Spain. I had some family that lived out in the Canary Islands, so I'd kind of grown up a little bit with that culture. And I studied history and Spanish at Durham. Within that time in my degree, I got to do a year abroad where I went to Lima in Peru for a year, which was quite a step change in terms of going from classroom Spanish to business Spanish. I worked out there for a year. And then when I graduated from Durham, the only thing I wanted to do was not live in the UK. um, I wanted to go somewhere and build on that Spanish again. So I actually went out to Canary Islands and worked there again for a year, which I think really forced me to properly learn business Spanish and immerse yourself in that environment. And came away from that year back to London pretty fluent. And I wouldn't be working in paddle if that wasn't the case.
Yeah, and so let me say that. I mean, I love languages as well. And what is uncommon about your ability is that you have the accent. I'm just wondering to what extent you had to lean in to figure out how to know the accentuations as well as the accents. And because when you speak, I mean, you have a bona fide rhythm of a native Spanish speaker.
Yeah, I don't know, like, I wouldn't consider myself one of those people that, can learn hundreds of languages or pick things up after a couple of hours. I think I had teachers from all over the world. I had teachers at university from Argentina, and then my I
Or
think my
la
tu
chama.
yeah, I think my tutor was from Madrid, and I think it's maybe just that mix. And then I find myself when I talk to people from different areas of Spain, I actually end up imitating their accents. I don't know why that is. There's probably some psychological element behind that, but you end up, from talking to somebody from Argentina, and my Yaz will go yeah, and I'm like, oh no, Emily, stop. Um, but yeah, I don't know. I wish someone would study it and tell me why some people pick up languages easier than others. But yeah, I'm very, very grateful for it, and whenever I can, I try and get the chance to practice it. Whenever I see Spanish people around, I'm like, "No, please, let's talk in Spanish," so that I keep it
Vamos.
up. Vamos.
Indeed. Well, so brilliant. And then the other thing, of course, is that you were a tremendous athlete. You played hockey for the under 21 national team. Talk us about your experience representing the country.
Yeah, it seems like a while ago now, but
Sure.
it was awesome. There's nothing quite like putting on like a shirt that says England and stepping out and singing the national anthem. Like, I'll never look back on that with anything other than a smile and lovely memories. But I'd played hockey my whole life. My mum was a great hockey player in New Zealand, and so started from a very young age, worked up. I always thought my dream might one day be to go to an Olympics, but maybe now that will be commentating rather than playing. Um, but yeah, I was really dedicated to it at school, and then went to Durham, which obviously has an amazing hockey team as well. Played a lot there up to under 21 level. Did some amazing trips, some incredible tournaments, and yeah, hockey's given me a lot. It's where I first started broadcasting and presenting. So I'm also very lucky that that's been able to continue, and the hockey community is fantastic. And it's amazing when I go to these events and see lots of familiar faces, some of whom, have now gone to an Olympics, and now I'm interviewing them on the side of the pitch, and that's a lovely full circle moment.
Yeah, and obviously so much credibility. I was trying to think as I was listening to you, Emily, and knowing you, what position you played in hockey. I'm going to guess midfield, but that's just my first thought.
Yeah, I give off midfield energy. Good centre half, I
Yeah,
reckon. That's where I
running
sat
back
most of the
for
time.
yeah, exactly. I played left wing. And then you got into paddle. What was the moment? I mean, was it in the Canary Islands? I'm thinking. Well, it certainly wasn't in Peru. I don't think at that time.
No, not in Peru. It was actually a little bit later than that. So I had just worked at the Commonwealth Games when it was in Birmingham in 2022, doing the stadium announcing in hockey. And um, soon after that, somebody got in touch that had was working in kind of some media in hockey, and I did some work for them. And they then came to me a couple of months later and was like, "Oh, have you heard of this sport, paddle?" Because they had only just gone into it as well, and had started to build some media around paddle. And I was like, "I know absolutely nothing about this sport, but let's see what we can do." And went to when the World Championship qualifiers was up in Derby. That
Mm.
was the first time that I had experienced paddle, and went there, with the paddle paper at the time who were covering it, to basically create a documentary, because it was the biggest thing that had happened in the UK. Nobody knew what paddle was, and so, I mean, neither did I really, right? But it was an opportunity to go and start to spread the word, and I guess that went very well. Got to know some of the players, and just kind of sparked a little bit of, oh, there's a real niche here. Nobody else is doing it. It's a real opportunity to create a voice for paddle, for somebody that, has a presenting or media skill set. And that's, I guess, what I went and did, but it didn't like go from 0 to 100 immediately. It's been a slow burner, and I think it's grown alongside the sport has grown, and this year has just exploded, and there is 100 times the number of events there was back then.
Además, ayuda que hablas español. It's a kind of a good fit. Um,
Mhm.
so you had a corporate career, and then you say, all right, I'm going to jump in, go whole hog on this as a professional commentator, presenter,
Mhm.
documentarian. You won the BBC New Voice Award this year, 2025. Wow. What was that like?
Yeah.
There are over 1,100 entrants, and you were the one that came on top. What, what do you think
Yeah.
made that happen?
It was a really it wa almost didn't happen. So, it was, like, maybe December last year, and my sister's friend sent her a link saying, "I think your sister should apply for this." And it was the day that it closed, and you had to submit commentary. So I was like, right, I've got one chance. I'll go upstairs into my spare room and have a go and try and do this. And I looked through a lot of the commentary that I had done and tried to like clip a couple of bits together that I was really proud of. Sent it off, didn't really think anything of it. And it was paddles. So I was like, maybe they'll see this and think, oh, that's interesting. I'm sure they'll get loads and loads of football submissions. And then I got a call in maybe March time, so it was a really long gap between December and March, and I didn't really think too much of it, and got this call, and they were like, "You won." And so I think, that alongside the kind of getting the work with Premier Padel as well at the start of the year, and realizing that actually, one, I didn't have enough annual leave to do my corporate job and
On the
this
side. Hmm.
on the side. It wasn't, I couldn't justify it as a side hustle anymore. Um, and also realizing, if I can put everything into doing this, take every opportunity with the BBC that I can, then you know what, maybe I actually can do, a proper career out of this. But it probably wasn't until that award or a couple of other big bits of work that I got that I actually probably believed it. I thought I would be side hustling with it and just doing it with my weekends forever.
Well, congratulations on both counts. Moving into your passion is a beautiful thing. Certainly, observations that I have, and regularly when I talk to people on the Joy of Paddle, we're talking about with players and looking at
Mhm,
paddle and how do you play. And you and I chatted a little bit beforehand about your own paddle. You don't play so much. One of the things that I remark is that most of the time we're talking about tennis players or squash players who convert to paddle and then they get
mhm.
addicted to it. It's also been my observation that football players, because of their athleticism naturally, are quite adequate quickly in paddle. I have to imagine hockey players are actually much better equipped because of the hand eye, even though it's down below, it's very different. How do you react to that? What other sports, maybe blind spots that I might have that actually translate well into paddle?
Yeah, I think you've mentioned all the key ones. I think if you look at a couple of hockey players now, like Ellie Tate, for example, I also played some England stuff with her. So we're kind of going through this journey a little bit together, albeit on different paths. But she's now an excellent paddle player. Somebody like Sophie Bray as well, has moved over. She went to the Olympics and is now playing in paddle tournaments. Um, Yes, there is a good hand-eye. I think there's a good competitiveness.
Mm.
And I think I've actually spoken to Ellie Tate quite a lot about this, that paddle is still, even though people train and do quite a lot of stuff on their own, it is still a team sport. So compared to maybe just going running or going to the gym or playing tennis, I think that ability that you still have to work in a team is something that, yes, it's not a team of 11 or 16 individuals on a hockey pitch, but there is a really important element of it, of communication and strategy, that I think does translate over very well also. And I wouldn't be surprised if more hockey players come and start playing paddle. I think my old hockey team in London have done it a couple of times as a social as well. So it works. I think most sports translate very well into paddle. Um, I'm a very don't let the ball hit the back, hit it
Mm.
as hard as you can, um, type of player. Always want to go for a big smash, which is not not the right way to play, but it's how I kind of get my fix.
That's fun. Well, I did play with a man who played for the Scottish national team in hockey, and so I had a little chat with him, but that was pre-COVID. And here's the interesting thing, Emily. I mean, you intellectually, like most of us, we can watch. We say, this is what I should do.
Mm,
Especially since you're up close, you get to hang out with Jose Maria and Ali Sanchez, or Cuello, Tapia, and so on, and you see that intellectually you're not supposed to hit every ball hard. Yet
mhm.
we do. What do you think is the key conversion factor that allows us to come down and just be present with the ball a little bit more?
That's a great question. I would love to be in the minds of somebody like Paula Josemaria. I think, for one, she is one of the most mentally tough people on the circuit. She's fantastic to watch. She never looks phased. Um, but I think it's an understanding of winners versus unforced errors versus you're making your opponent make the error, right? And I think if you start looking at the game not as everything or every shot that you do has to be the winner, and it doesn't have to be this huge hard hit. There's so much more to the strategy of, okay, why am I actually using a lob? It's to push the opposition back so I can get to the net. It's not about necessarily winning that point, but if you can maybe push them a bit further back, their chances of messing up at the back of the court increases, or it allows me to get into a better position up at the net, that maybe it's not a huge smash, it's just a little volley that then catches them off. So I think it's that it's not necessarily thinking about every single shot in isolation. I think the more you play and the more you study and the more you watch these games, yes, there's some incredible smashes and all those beautiful points look amazing when it goes out the court or, the por cuatro. But it's much more strategic than I think a lot of people appreciate around how you're moving the opposition, how you're communicating with your partner and telling them where they are. And I think when you get that intelligent around the game strategy and how you're actually building points, it becomes a lot more obvious that the winners look great, but they're not the be all and end all, I think.
Mm. And yet it feels like so many people struggle to capture that idea. Perhaps as an amateur, it's because we don't have such long points in general, but you don't have this sense of sequences back and forth. It's more like a bida bang, bida boom sort of approach.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think especially, when when you're maybe not quite good enough to sustain a rally or to defend, then you actually don't get the chance to play those long rallies. I would also say here, I think the other thing that's not damaging because it's natural is that a lot of what we see as in highlights or clips on social
La
media
magia.
are always these insane points. And I would love to see, and I don't know, maybe we could get this one day, but I would love to see like maybe some data on the time spent in rallies versus the time spent, playing those amazing shots and try and work out a little bit of, I don't know, the game makeup, if that makes sense. But yeah, I think when people see these amazing out of the court runs and, behind the back and they think that that's that's what it's all about. I'm not sure it quite is. And I want people to come and watch professional tournaments more. I think there's nothing quite like actually seeing it live and appreciating how good these players are and how a professional paddle match plays out. It's spectacular.
Well, I obviously agree. I just love watching, and I want to do a little hat tip to my friend Vianney Dubois, who does paddle intelligence, and
Mhm,
the kinds of data that he's been following for the last 10 years, and things like um, the number of lobs that the pros hit when they're in the back. It's going to be 25-30% more for the women than the men, depending on the speed of the court. And that number always should stand out because the number of lobs that we amateurs tend to do, we think of it
mhm,
as like a distress shot as opposed to an attacking shot. When's the right time to hit a lob? Then Vianney also looks at the assists, the
mhm.
ones, all the build up, how your partner on the right, if they're right-handed, helped to create the situation to get the winner. And then what's the length of an average point at the pro
Mhm.
level? 9.5 or roughly 11 for the women, 9.5 for the men. And all these elements that go
I
into.
will be digging into that.
There you go. Well,
Thank you.
I should put you in touch with DNA
Yes, please,
because
please.
he's the only guy who has real data at this moment with it's called Paddle Intelligence. Dot AI. Oh, I'm going to make a mistake. Oh, dot live. Yeah, that's it.
Amazing. That's what right
Anyways,
up my street. I'll have a look.
cool. That's a good thing. And anyway, so from commentating, what do you think makes for good commentary? I mean, we get to listen to it, but you in your commentator's brain and your
Mhm.
head, how do you think about commentating to make it good for the listeners?
So if we talk specifically about paddle commentating and I commentate in English, um, majority of the time in what I do, I think there's a real balance at the minute in English paddle commentary between education, not oversimplifying to people that watch paddle all the time, but making sure that if you're tuning in for the first time, if I'm describing a shot and it has a Spanish name, someone's not going, "What did she say? What does that mean?" And
A
actually
bandeja. Yeah.
exactly, and actually talking through it. So that's one bucket, the kind of educational side. Then I think there's a contextual side, which you can't ignore. You can't just go into a game without, you know, the listener understanding what's come before, what's going to happen. There's a lot of behind the scenes in paddle of previous partners, and as we get throughout the season, people switch who they're playing with, and that could make it really exciting, if they're playing against a previous partner, which adds, adding the context
A little
around
bit
the
of pepper.
game.
Mhm.
Exactly, a little bit of firepower. Um, and then there's the actual, play by play of what's happening. And some of the best advice I ever got was, you know, you can use your voice in such an effective way to like to add emotion to the point. So if something is really boring, someone was like, you can say that it's boring. You can say nothing's happening. And I think maybe that's more akin to football than it is to paddle, because
Mm.
in paddle there's always an interesting point happening, more or less. But if something wasn't that exciting, you don't need to sound excited about it. And you can save those moments of real excitement and emotion and use your voice in a really effective way to, you know, e emphasize emotion or get something out of the person that's listening. Not everything has to be 100% exciting, and the way you actually communicate with your voice, it's not just about what you're saying, but it's about how you're saying it. Um, that's what I kind of think about in my 3 buckets. How am I educating people? What's the context behind everything? And then actually in the play by play, not talking too much, not, um making everything sound like it's the best point in the world, and kind of marrying all those things together to have a really good product. But I don't always come away from a game and think I've done an amazing job. I'm quite self-critical and will sometimes be like, I didn't say that quite right, or oh, I didn't mention that bit when I really should have done. So, you know, always learning as well.
Well, that is a lovely attitude to have. And in your second bucket, I think speaks to an interest as a viewer of
Mhm.
paddle, which is so I really distinct, I feel. There's that element of the synergy or the antagonism, the history, the context, as you say, it makes it so intriguing. I don't know of another sport that has that level of intrigue. If you take football, when you have 11 people, it's there are too many, if you will, separate
Mhm.
side stories to that. And let's say Diaz comes back and he plays against Liverpool. Okay, that's an obvious intrigue, but it feels like in paddle, it's sort of every match there's intrigue. Oh, this, especially since we have so many predictable results at some level, where one, two, three,
Yeah.
four are always in the semifinals virtually. And then you have, this is the 19th time that these two have come up against these two, and it's 8-6 and this and that, or 17-2, and
Mhm.
can they make it through? What makes the difference? How did they win those two matches because of the surface or whatever? And then finally, with regard to the third bucket, the play-by-play, to what extent? So you mentioned boredom, but what about shitty shots? How often and where do you feel? Because you're such a positive person, Emily. But that was a really stupid shot.
I I think you just have to be honest with the audience. Like if somebody if like Tapia frames the ball and he goes for the big smash and he doesn't pull it off and it goes out into the audience, sometimes you have to laugh along with it and be like, you know what, everybody's human. Everybody makes
Hashtag
those
just like
shots.
us.
Exactly. Hashtag just like us. But you know, people are also watching it. You can't lie to them and be like, oh yeah, that was great when it was terrible, or it's just gone into the net and they've fluffed it because of, they didn't have their racket held tight enough. And I think that's where a little bit as well of more technical knowledge comes in. And, I think it's different doing this if you had somebody on co-coms who is an ex-coach or an ex-player, because they're often that person adds the more kind of color that adds, they framed that because they weren't, that they didn't quite try and hit it in the right place, or their eyes weren't, fixed
Got
on
caught
the
by the
ball.
light, maybe, or
Exactly. And sometimes that is difficult when maybe something goes wrong, and not being an ex-player in the top 100 or a trained paddle coach, sometimes you don't know why things aren't quite happening, or sometimes you're a bit confused by the strategy, and you have to be honest with the audience about that, or you know there's no point hiding it and trying to blag your way through. So I think I really like working with co-commentators that can add just another level of expertise, and technical elements. But I think that is something that is not quite there yet with English commentary, because maybe
Mm.
we don't have people that have been world number ones in the UK and now want to commentate. I think we'll get there, with ex-coaches or ex-players that take to it, but we're not quite there yet.
Well, the other thing that you add, Emily, which is delightful, is the ability to understand when they go to the Los Banquillos, or go to the in the
Yes.
changeover, and you've got the coach talking with berating or energizing, whatever, and you can translate, you understand what's being said. I
Mhm.
think a lot of times, especially if you're just an English commentator, you don't have that Spanish, on top of not really being fully familiar with the culture of it. You can't give that nuance, and I think that as a viewer, maybe more of a afición, like a complete nut for paddle. I get really interested in what's being said by the coaches, and then that you're back to the context that you're talking about before, and
Mhm.
the intrigue. But from your viewpoint, yes, being a national hockey player and so involved in paddle today, to what extent do you believe that paddle can become a true spectator sport? It feels like it's most paddle is played, not watched.
Mhm. I think, to be completely honest, I think it already is. I just think we haven't had a tournament in the UK to experience that. Like, and I know in Spain and in Argentina, they will fill out stadiums, but I was in Dubai last week for a tournament, a country that probably has, a similar level of interest in the sport to here, maybe a little bit behind, but a lot of countries in that part of the world they have incredible facilities, and the sport is growing, and the number of players and courts, etc. And they, on finals day, managed to fill out a stadium of almost 8,000 people. And that's not a small amount of people at all. Um,
Not for paddle, that's for sure.
no, not for paddle. Even, maybe in Argentina they sell out 17,000. But I think because and I talk to the UK specifically here, I think because we haven't maybe had the chance to experience watching top paddle yet, and I say yet, in this country, then I think if people went and watched, a P1 or a major, or even a P2, like the show is the same, then they would understand a little bit more why there's so much buzz around watching it live. And also, we don't quite have venues in this country at the minute that facilitate, arena viewing, or we haven't set them up yet for that purpose. But I would say, I mean, I always say this to people. I'm like, please go and watch a tournament. I mean, there's finals in Barcelona in a couple of weeks. If people want some pre-Christmas shopping down Las Ramblas, and they want to pop into the paddle on their way, I think it's quite game changing when you see the top players in the world on court. It's just a whole another level to what we're used to.
My invitation, Roland Garros, they have managed to get in a big crowds. It's an amazing venue. It's just a
Yeah.
Eurostar away. And then there's the Hexagon Cup, of course, in January in Madrid, which is also another type of exciting paddle match. And the truth is that because paddle is still not hugely known, it's very likely that you can bump into Agustin or Jose, Paula,
Hmm.
and if you speak Spanish, with those two in particular, it's better. But hanging out with them is always a pleasure. Well, and I think so. This is a word to LTA. The other thing I was thinking about, just a little bit goofily, is that I was just imagining, well, with the Queen's Club, they have their
Yes.
Wimbledon. Why don't we just keep it up one more week? And everyone at Queen's Cup is going to look at me, scream at me if I mention this, but keep it up one more week and then fill it with a paddle, a central court. We're a long way from that. Well, what do you when you think about watching the pros, the women and the men? how do you distinguish? What do you make? What's the best of the men? What's the best of the women? Because obviously they're different.
Ooh, yeah. The main difference is most of the top 10 men on the circuit will have a pretty unbelievable ability to smash the ball out the court. You look at the likes of Ausburger, Galan, um, Cuello, and they are, lauded for having an unbelievable smash. Tapia a little bit unorthodox, but he's up there. Um, and just because of, you know, the physical aspect of the women's game, you just don't have as many players that can do that. There's still some fantastic smashers. Gemma Triay, Bea Gonzalez, they are again up there for their power and their technique in the
And
smash.
even
But
little Paula can put out por
yes,
tres.
dinamita. um, but I think, just women aren't as tall as men. They're not
Sure.
as just naturally you see a lot less smashes as winners in the game. So I think what you tend to see is longer rallies, longer games, and I think potentially a little bit more mentality and strategy in the women's game, just because you can't just finish a point as easily as potentially you could in the men. Um, there's also a bit less out of court play in the women's, just because again the ball is maybe less likely to go out because it's not being hit as much in those areas. But I think they're both as impressive as the other because I mean, they're not. I say this like they're hugely different. I actually don't think they are. I think it's minuscule details around the type of shots used and probably the length of rallies and how the pairs build points to find the winners. But they're both, they've both created some of the most amazing shots that I've ever seen. And I enjoy them both equally for those different reasons. I probably said wow more times in the men's game just because some of the smashes are just don't even understand. Some of them are flying around the court, but I think the perseverance and the stamina that is seen in the women's game is hugely impressive as well.
Yeah, that ability to hold back, because in the end of the day, with your longer points as a couple, you're trying to build it up. What are the sequences we have? We reset. Okay, I'm not going to be impatient. We're back to a reset. Back,
Mhm.
right? Let me put up a lob. Oh, it's not big enough. Put up another one. Ah, there we go. Back to the front. Let's transition.
Yeah.
And then you go back and you wave in and out. And that uh, tenacity within the point is huge. I mean, I think, and I've said this many times, for anyone who's not a pro, watching the women's is far more instructive. And it reminds
Mhm.
me, actually, Emily, of my time when I used to begin to play paddle back in the 70s. We had sometimes the rule that you can't win the point by hitting the ball out. Because back in those days, all the walls were never
Oh.
more than 3 meters. And so if we use tennis balls, so they're easier to pop out. So you had to win within the court. If you hit it out, you'd lose the point. And so
Interesting.
you had to learn how to win the point within the court. That's only for some, and it was a, let's say, an eccentric unknown sport back in the 70s for the most part. All right, so last finish, because this is the joy of paddle. What about your funniest, or should I say funnest, moment in paddle?
Ooh, let me have a think about this one. My funnest moment. Why am I taking so long to think? There's a few running around in my head at the moment.
Work of the
Specific to
silence.
specific to commentary or more in
In
general?
paddle, it could be going down the sidelines and doing an interview. It can be your playing paddle yourself, a thing you've watched and slipped up on, or whatever, anything that comes to mind.
Yeah, some of those slip ups. No, I think this is really difficult actually.
Huh.
No, I'm getting there. I'm getting there. I think my can I say my favorite moment that's
Yes.
happened? I think when when I first started at the beginning of the year, um, and I went out to my first kind of in-person tournament with Premier Padel and started doing the interviewing. Um, I was obviously quite new to the players, and at first, when I started talking in English, the terror that I got some of these looks in these players, and and then of course switch into Spanish and everything's okay. But I remember, like, and I think it might have been with Fede Cingotto and Ali Galan when they'd won, and I was talking to had to do half of the interview in English with Galan and half of it in Spanish with Cingotto, but it was the first time they'd met me. So I started off in English, and Ali Galan has actually got quite good English, but as
Better.
he
He's got
was
better.
yes, as he was replying in the interview, um, Fede Cingotto was stood there making the most, like, hilarious faces, and he was just standing there, and,
He's a little bit Mr. Bean at times.
yeah, and it was really, really hard to keep a straight face in this interview, and I was like, "I can't do this," and then it went over to him, and again, and because then it was in the Spanish, and I think my Spanish was just not my brain was in other places, I was all over the place, and I think I just couldn't get the Spanish out. And it ended up being it was a very funny interview in the end that I look back on with fond memories. And now when they see me, they're not as scared because they know I can I can speak in Spanish. But I think it it was fun getting to know the players in that atmosphere, but also kind of
Mm.
seeing their reactions for the first time and um yeah, and not being all that comfortable with the English, which now they're much better at.
Yeah,
But it was
and
a
it must
very
be
memorable interview.
yeah, and then there's this also you come to get to know the players. They get to
Hmm.
know you, and you install a certain relationship actually when you come. So Fede, since you played 16 times with them, Ali and this and that, and you won there,
Hmm.
and you know the history, you know the context, and that
Hmm.
surely changes the nature of your interviews.
Yeah, it's just a familiar smile rather than them turning up for the interview and being like, "Who's this? I'm not used to this." And then they're maybe a little bit more closed, but now there's a, "Hi, hey, how are you? Congratulations," before you actually get into it, and
Yeah.
it sets a much nicer tone, I think.
Yeah.
Um,
Plus, you
yeah.
also, they're probably used to your capacidad de hablar en dos idiomas, ability to speak two languages quickly, switching backwards and forwards. They get that. All right. Well, Emily,
Mhm.
fabulous. The future of paddle in Great Britain. How would you describe that? Last words.
Ooh. Um, Exciting, possibly a little bit overwhelming, and a real need for lots of people to pull together to make it a success. Um, Competition should be seen as healthy and positive to bring up the level or across all areas of the business. But overall, the sport's not going anywhere. I think it's pretty unstoppable. Um, we just need to make sure that everyone is pulling in the same direction and continues to be as positive about it as we are at the moment. But, we're going to see big tournaments come to the UK. It is going to be incredibly exciting. I will do my best to make sure everybody who's ever picked up a racket will go and watch and experience that. So I'm very excited for next year and the future. It's going to be amazing.
How can I steer anyone to go track you down, hire you as a commentator for their next event, and follow you while all you're doing, Emily?
Um, so either I'm at Kilner_presents on Instagram. I have my website, which is very self-explanatory, emilykilnerpresenting.com, LinkedIn. Yeah, stuff is booking up for 2026. So I, if there's new events and things like that, very open to talking to people. But if anyone wants to just talk about paddle, about the world of sport in general, then I love it. So yeah, let me know.
I'm excited with you and for you, Emily. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, Minter. This has been a lovely conversation. Thank you.